early in the morning on the streets of Philadelphia. It was freezing cold. And I just started to feel something welling inside. And they go, "Sly, are you ready?" I go, "I'm not, but Rocky is."
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 272. Releasing on the 9th of June on digital and video demand in the United States and Canada, and at becomingrocky.com for those from Australia and other international territories, is Becoming Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, a fascinating 30-minute documentary comprised of never-before-seen behind-the-scenes footage that chronicles the making of Rocky, the 1976 Oscar-winning film and pop culture phenomenon that changed the landscape of film forever. Narrated by Sylvester Stallone and featuring Super 8 footage shot by acclaimed director John G. Avildsen, Becoming Rocky is a must-see for not only Rocky fans, but for film buffs everywhere who want to see the making of an American classic. Joining me now to talk about Becoming Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, is the film's director and producer, Derek Wayne Johnson. Derek, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here. So,
the making of this, or the making of this, is really fascinating to me. So previously you did a documentary about the director of Rocky and Karate Kid, a bunch of other great films, John G. Avildsen. That film was called King of the Underdogs. Was it during the making of that film that you came across the footage that we're going to see in the Becoming Rocky movie?
Yeah, the whole thing is quite fascinating. Most of this footage in Becoming Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, it has been seen before, except there's a little bit of footage that has never been seen, and that's from John Avildsen's personal vault. So, on DVD and Blu-ray special features of Rocky, we've seen a lot of this stuff. And when I did King of the Underdogs, John gave me hours and hours and hours of footage that was digitized that I could use for his documentary. Well, one night I went to dinner with mutual friends and met Frank Stallone. We had not met yet, and I had already made King of the Underdogs. Mm-hmm. Well, I had some footage that I assumed he hadn't seen yet of him and his brother Sly sparring in a ring back in 1975. So I put it on my phone. I asked Avildsen if I could show Frank. He said, of course. When I showed Frank, he wept. He really teared up. He had never seen it. And he told Sly. Now, granted, I had already interviewed Sly for King of the Underdogs, so he knew who I was. But Sly asked him, see if Avildsen and Derek will give me all of this footage just for my personal, archive. So I put it all on a Blu-ray, put some Rocky music underneath it, and about a year later, I'm invited to Sly's house. My producing partner, Chris May, and I, and Frank Stallone, we went over there to Sly's so he could watch King of the Underdogs. Well, here's some of this footage, right? Well, he loved the film so much that while the credits for Underdogs are rolling, he said, guys, I have an idea. I want you to make a documentary solely based on this footage of John's, and I'll narrate it for you. And, a lot of this stuff has been seen before, but see if you can find anything that hasn't been seen. Well, naturally, I went to John. He was still alive at this time. Of course, he passed away, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And he said, absolutely. And so that is how this footage came to be, and we're very excited about it because, again, most of it has been seen, but for the little snippets that haven't, it's quite charming that we got to release some of it finally.
Like you said before, us Rocky fans, we've bought the DVDs, we've bought the Blu-rays, we've seen some of this stuff before. I think a lot of the stuff we might have seen is like out of your documentary, some of the sparring footage between Carl Weathers and Stallone in regards to that kind of stuff. The things that I love, though, is kind of like the behind the scenes stuff, the stuff of Stallone at John G. Avildsen's son's birthday. things like that we haven't seen before, the things that really delve like really into the more kind of personal relationships that between filmmakers and their actors and etc. Was there a moment when you're watching this footage that really floored you? Because, as you said before, Frank Stallone really had an emotional impact. Stallone was so moved by it that he wanted to narrate the thing. What about yourself? When you're watching this stuff, what was the first thing that kind of popped in your head like, wow, I have not seen that before?
Well, I don't want to give too much away because I want, the audience to see it for themselves, some of the stuff that's in there.
Of
But
course, yep.
Since you did mention the birthday party, that's one of them. I was completely shocked that here we are in July of '76, months before the film is released, and there's Sylvester and John and John's kids, and they're all at this birthday party, and they're just having a good time. And little do they know that just less than a year from now, Rocky will win Best Picture, John Avildsen will win Best Director, and Sylvester Stallone will become the biggest superstar ever. And to me, that was fascinating to see. And it was very sweet. And it was very charming. Now, there's also some footage that I didn't add, which was really cool, of more family stuff. Mm-hmm. But I decided not to add that in just because it felt too personal. Mm-hmm. So for the fans, just know that too exists. But I'm not going to release that.
And that's fair enough too. I mean, there's only so many things you can really delve into, and especially without John G. Avildsen being around now, you don't have his permission to do so. There's a line that has to be drawn down. I can definitely understand that. When I was watching the film, I think a lot of people forget that the first Rocky movie was such a low budget affair. I mean, it was very much like an independent film, and I think people forget that because it became such a huge phenomenon. You had all the sequels and the box office success, and of course, you mentioned before Stallone becoming the biggest action star, if not the biggest movie star of the world, and still is like up there as one of the greats. And I think something that really comes to me when I watch this, the footage, is there's a humbleness to it. You get to see what it was like when Stallone was like just scraping by and trying to get this film made, and you have all these kind of people come together. Some of them are kind of known. Talia Shire had the Godfather films, and Burgess Meredith had a career, of course, before all of it. But there was a kind of like a humbleness to it I think was really kind of appealing and really touching. Is that something that you found as well when watching that footage?
Oh, absolutely. And even in Sly's voice when he's narrating, which really isn't narration, it's more like commentary. It's like he's seeing it for the first time. You really hear that in his voice, and he's a very sentimental guy, and Rocky is he's very close to his heart, of course. So yeah, absolutely. Like just seeing how low budget it was, and seeing the like for their equipment truck was just like one cargo van, things like that. You're like, wow. And you're right, it did feel like an independent film, but it was a studio film, but it didn't have a lot of support financially. And of course, it went on to become, one of the most successful low-budget movies of all time.
We've mentioned Stallone a bunch of times now. You've met him. He's narrated the film. I think I have a bucket list of like people I'd love to interview, and Stallone is like the top of that because his movies had his movies are the reasons that I watch movies. I mean, my first memories of film was watch Rocky movies when I was growing up as a kid. What's Stallone like? I mean, this is a guy who's been a movie star for such a long time. Is that, you talked before about he's a very sentimental guy. Is that kind of that humbleness, that kind of hunger that he had when he was younger? Does that still kind of resonate even today when watching his films and when he kind of approaches his career and such? What are your reactions? What are your memories of being around him and hanging out with him and having him work on this project?
Well, fortunately, I consider Sly and I friends. And, I've been to his house several times, and we've worked on a few projects together. And and if you would have told me I was going to say that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have said, you're crazy. So I got to know him personally, and we communicate and whatnot. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful guy. Now, I'm not saying all this to sound like a name dropper, but I'm getting back to your question. Is he's a family man? He has a wonderful family. His relationship with his daughters and with Jennifer, his wife, is amazing. And his brother Frank, they have like this really cool, fun brotherly rivalry going on, and you just realize that like he's the Superman that we all grew up with in real life, but he's also very approachable. He never turns fans away and things like that, and he's just a really cool guy. He is the epitome of a movie star. He knows that people look at him as Superman, and he knows how to make them feel, really good about themselves. And I appreciate that. It's funny. Like I was talking about the family thing. He's invited me over before with Frank and again Chris May, my producing partner, and his whole family. We all just sat in the screening room and watched the rough cut of my Frank Stallone doc. Mm-hmm. And he gave me notes, and you're like just sitting there, and there's the dog, the family dog, running around. It's these big superstars they're people too, but Sly, when he's in the room, you're around Hollywood royalty, and he's just the best. He's the best at what he does.
It's interesting watching this footage because it reminds of the days where things weren't documented so frequently. I mean, these days, especially through social media platforms, transparency is a really successful marketing strategy. You go behind the scenes, you hang out with actors, they shoot, they do things from their house, they do things from the set. Back then, there wasn't that much going on because, number one, the technology wasn't there, and number two, I think the thing about films, especially back like in the 70s and the 80s and early 90s, is that there was this kind of like a mystery towards it. The silver screen really brought about, really there's a cloak there that I don't think is there anymore. Do you think we're missing those kind of days where, I don't know. Well, I think what I'm trying to get to is that, are we missing the days where we can be surprised again when it comes to access to movies and makings of movies? Because Rocky was released back in 1976, and we're still being surprised by a lot of things that's happening behind the scenes, as your documentary kind of showed. Are we missing that kind of thing these days?
Absolutely. I for one can't stand it, because for me, movies are magic. Well, I don't want to see a released photo or the actor in full makeup doing an Instagram live or something on the set of this movie. There needs to be certain mystique about the movie. And my problem with this whole leaking and doing the stuff on set and showing things ahead of time is it's this new up-and-coming generation. That's what they're going to expect.
Yeah.
So the magic is lost. And that to me is really sad. And so films like 40 Years Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, or Becoming Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, as it's known in Australia, there's so much magic to that, because this stuff, it almost shouldn't have existed back then. But 40 years, really 44 years from now, there won't be any mystery behind it. And that's really, really sad to me. But we have to roll with the times, and it is what it is.
It's been 44 years since the first Rocky came out, yet it's a movie that still resonates so strongly. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that, it's cliche to say, but, everyone has an underdog in them, or everyone knows an underdog. You rarely, movies that have someone that is already made it successful and doesn't have a drive for anything, those aren't really successful films. But movies where, you have someone that's just down on their luck and gets a second chance. I mean, Rocky's a fairy tale. It's Cinderella for men. It's a love story for men. And I think that it speaks to that sensitive nature of men. we all want to feel like men, and we don't want society to bring us down. And Rocky, although you got to remember, he also was a bit of a thug. He was a good-hearted thug, and he didn't break the thumb, but he still was a thug. Because and I think that people, that really showed them, hey, I can relate to that. Because maybe I've done some things in my life that I'm not proud of. But man, if I were just given one more chance. And so yeah, I think Rocky it speaks to us all in that sense.
I remember the first time I saw a Rocky film. It was Rocky 2. I'm 39 now, so I'm from the VHS generation. And I remember very clearly my older brother was watching Rocky 2. It was the last fight scene. And I remember it was just like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, there were some films I saw beforehand, but it was mostly kind of like, cartoony kind of stuff. But there was a grittiness, there was a reality, there was the violence, there was the stakes at play. The last parts of Rocky 2 where both Rocky and Apollo Creed are trying to climb up the ropes as a 10 count is going on. That memory is burned into my brain. I can still remember that. And I think I must have been around, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old when I saw that, and that's still a firm memory to me. Derek, do you remember the first time you've seen Rocky or a Rocky film? Do you have a first Rocky memory that sticks with you?
Absolutely. I remember the first time I saw each one of the Rockies. Of course, when you're young, I hate to say it, you don't really watch Rocky 1 because it's slow and you don't get it yet. You watch Rocky 4 and 3 and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember the first time I saw Rocky, I was about 7 or 8, but I grew up really watching the sequels like you just talked about. And I remember the first Rocky I had on VHS was Rocky 2. So, because I'm 37, so I'm from the same generation. And it's, I have distinct memories of each time, each of those films when I saw it. And I was very lucky. My grandfather, who has since passed, he was a big hero of mine. And he really introduced me to Rocky. And anytime I wanted to watch one, he would watch it with me. It wasn't like, no, you've seen that too many times. He was game every time. And just some of the best memories I have are watching Rocky with him. Or Rocky 1, 2, 3, whichever one it was.
It's interesting you say that about your grandfather, because I think the Rocky movies, more than any other I can kind of think of, are movies that kind of transcend generations. Because my father is old world. He came to Australia in 1969 from Croatia. Movies wasn't really his thing, But the Rocky movies, Stallone films, he'd watch those films, and those were the only memories I ever had of watching films with my dad were those kind of movies. It's kind of interesting how these Rocky films and Stallone films in particular really do kind of transcend generations, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, it's there's Casablanca.
Yeah.
It'll live forever. There's The Godfather. It'll live forever. Rocky's one of those films. It'll live forever. It will never die. And, I mean, a lot of people, the film snobs will say, oh, it shouldn't have won Best Picture that year. Yes, it should.
Yeah.
Yes, it should.
Yes, it should.
It not only is it the better film, and not only is it just captivated generation after generation, if you really look at what John Avildsen did with that film on that budget and that script and those characters and everything, it totally outweighs the showmanship of the films that it was up against, which I love. I love all of those films, don't get me wrong. But there's something about Rocky that did it right, and I think it's going to live forever.
It's also a film that was very much innovative as well. I mean, you touched on in the documentary the use of the Steadicam in there as well. Fight choreography was another one as well that was kind of like made a big impact. I think Rocky 2 kind of like even pushed that even to more boundaries, and the things that Stallone did with the other films as well just kind of pushed that, and the use of score as well. Like there's a lot of things in that movie that really kind of changed the way that people made films. And you mentioned before the year that it won was the Oscars was in 77, but it was released in 76. Other movies released that year was Taxi Driver, Network, All the President's Men. All great movies, but to me, Rocky does stand above all of those. And I think there is, I think because of the sequels, don't you think there's in certain circles in the film critic community, there's a sort of snobbery towards Rocky, not towards the film that it is, but more about the films that it's associated with.
Yeah, I mean, all of the sequels, all of that kind of stuff, it kind of, they stick their noses up to that. But again, there's a reason why those sequels exist. It's because that first movie was so great.
And not only that, it kind of, again, transcends generations, transcends cultures. I mean, look at the Creed films as well. I mean, that was just the way that they were managed to take the Rocky story and reimagine it and bring it into a different direction. It's just fantastic. I want to put you on the spot here, Derek. We just talked about the sequels. I want to rank the Rocky sequels. I want to see what your opinion is of this. So I'm going to share my rankings of sequels 1 to 6. I'm not going to talk about the Creed films because I think they're in a different thing there. I'm going to go Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky Balboa, and then 4, 3, and 5. Derek, do you have a ranking yourself in regards to the sequels?
Interesting. That's a good list, or a good order. I'd go Rocky 1, Rocky 2, 3. Oh, excuse me. Let me start over.
Yep.
Okay, Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky Balboa, 3, 4, 5. Because I felt that Rocky 2 is such a great sequel.
Yep.
And it's the same movie as Rocky 1, except he wins this time. But it's done so well. I feel that Rocky Balboa was such a wonderful ending to that. Well, we think it's in the ending to that series, and it's very, very well done. Rocky 3 is where it starts to become more of a comic book, but there's still some good, serious moments. Rocky 4, I love, but we're talking about how great the films are, not the order of the ones we love. It's so crazy and surreal. And Rocky 5, it just doesn't do it. And I've seen the director's cut, which a lot of people have. I'm not sure if you have. And it's just a shame that a lot of Avildsen's original vision didn't make the cut. And that would have made that film just better.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware that there was a director's cut. Director's cuts these days, there's an appetite for that kind of footage. There's the Justice League's Snyder cut is releasing next year. There are talks of releasing different Star Wars cuts as well, etc. Do you think maybe that there could be a chance that Rocky 5, a director's cut of that? Do you reckon that there's a chance that could be released, or is that something that's for Stallone? Water under the bridge is not going to approach that project again.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, basically the Rocky 5 director's cut was it was a leaked rough cut of Avildsen's, so it wasn't like officially put out or anything like that. But it was on YouTube. I don't know if it's still there, and but I don't think they're going to touch it. I really don't. I think it's just kind of dead in the water. But it was really cool. Whoever leaked that rough cut, it still had time code on it and everything, I believe. It really showed like, hey, this really was going to be a lot better. And I think it finally gave some justice to that film.
What do you think happened with that movie? I mean, it was the reunion of Avildsen and Stallone, and the Rocky films haven't been around since, I think Rocky 4 was 1985, so it was like a good 5 years in between. What do you think happened there? Do you think it was just a case of too much creative conflict, too much expectation placed on it, and it kind of just lost itself under the burden of that weight?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything you just said, but as you probably know, Rocky was supposed to die in that film, and that's why John Avildsen signed on, because the script he read was just this beautiful ending to this character, and when he got the call that the studio had said no, he's not going to die, Avildsen was furious. And I think there was just so much happening there. First of all, the culture had changed. We go from 76 to 90. There was just so much wrong with it. And, Tommy Morrison caught a lot of flack for that, but he was wonderful in that film.
Yeah.
I mean, Tommy Morrison was fantastic. To not be a trained actor, he killed it in that film. But it's just not a good movie, and it's very, very unfortunate.
It's interesting how we talk about trained fighters in Rocky films. I mean, you had Tommy Morrison, you have Antonio Tarver was in Rocky Balboa, Tony Bellew was in the first Creed movie. You know, I don't know if you've seen out there, but Mike Tyson is looking pretty fierce, pretty healthy, pretty determined to get back into the fighting ring. Do you think that Sylvester Stallone is looking at that footage and he's you know, scratching his goatee, thinking, Tyson versus Rocky 7, you know, another movie? Do you think there could be any type of you know, potential of that happening?
I have never thought of that, but what a awesome idea that would be! Wow, that's pretty cool. I personally want to see. I don't want to see another Rocky film or another Creed film, but that I would pay money to see. That's pretty cool.
All I'm saying is that the ages kind of align. I mean, I think I know Stallone, he's older than Tyson, but Tyson is like almost 60, I'm pretty sure. I think he's around 57, 58. I'm not 100% there, but I'm just going to put that out into the universe and see what happens with that. And then if it happens, we can come back to these podcasts and we can take credit for it.
There you go. Well, yeah, because I think he's actually like 53, I want to say. But what's interesting about that is he's kind of living his own Rocky Balboa, you know, his own Rocky 6 moment. So, hey, more power to him.
When we were discussing our Rocky rankings right now, I think you and I both agree that Rocky is the best movie out of the Rocky series, but I think the most watched, the most loved, and I think for a lot of people, the movie that kind of introduced him to the series was Rocky 4. Because you said before, it's such a surreal kind of film. It's almost like in a sort of way, I think what we have now with kind of like comic book movies, kind of a lot of that originated with that movie. There's a mythology towards that film, and there's like, you know, just everything going with it. It's a fantastic pop culture movie. That movie is going to have its 35-year anniversary this year as well. I think it was released in December. It's like near Christmas time. You think there's any potential whatsoever? And I'm talking to you as a producer as well. You know, you have skin in the game in regards to these Stallone releases with this movie and Frank Stallone movie as well. Do you think there's any potential whatsoever that you could approach making a Rocky IV documentary, considering the cultural impact that film had?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I feel a little punch drunk because of all, you know, the last several years of being in the Rocky world with these 3 unofficial Rocky-esque documentaries I've done. But I think a Rocky IV documentary sounds pretty cool, I must admit.
And I tell you what, if it does happen, I would love to see it. In the meantime, though, we have Becoming Rocky, the making of a classic. This is fantastic stuff here, Derek. It really is. So for everyone out there, once again, 9th of June, releases in digital and video demand in the United States, in North America in general. Is that correct, Derek?
Yeah, so basically, I wanted to just clarify that, 40 Years of Rocky, The Birth of a Classic, releases June 9th in U.S. and Canada on iTunes, Amazon, you know, all those kind of platforms. And then it's known as Becoming Rocky, The Birth of a Classic in Australia and other parts of the world. And that will actually be available as well on June 9th on becomingrocky.com. That's where it could be found outside of the U.S. and Canada at this moment until more platforms, until it arrives on more platforms. So, I mean, it's going to spread like a wildfire, and we're just very excited for the whole world to see it.
And I can't wait for everyone to see it as well. I've seen it myself. I'm working on a 4-star review on it right now. For like I said in my intro, if you're a Rocky fan or just a fan of filmmaking and lover of cinema, you have to watch this film just for the fact that you're watching the making of a classic. And Derek, I thank you very much for your movie. It's fantastic. I can't wait to see your Frank Stallone documentary as well. And when that comes out, I'll be all over that as well. So until then, though, congratulations on the movie and best of luck to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate having me on the show and your kind words. And, as Sly always says, keep punching.